I'm Katherine Gorman. I'm the executive producer at Collective Next, which is a consulting group down in Boston, downtown, where I spend most of my time thinking about how groups can communicate efficiently and effectively about the things that are really important to them. And the specialization there is about really complicated or technical topics, right? So a lot of things to do with science and medicine and finance and technology. And one of the shows that we produce is Talking Machines. Some of you know it, that's great. We've just entered our 5th season with our host, Neil Lawrence. And Neil and I, for the past couple of years, have been co-press chairs for the Neural Information Processing Systems Conference, now NeurIPS, and ICML. And this year, it looks like I'm also going to be helping out with the International Conference on Learning Representations. And so all of that is to say that I sort of occupy a kind of weird place in the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence where I'm not a practitioner, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about these ideas that are evolving and unfolding and thinking about how they can be best communicated about inside the field and also to the outside of the field. And so today, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what the public conversation around those ideas is, how it's evolving, why it's evolving in that way, why it matters, and what it's going to actually take to change that conversation and perhaps inject a little bit more of the reality of the research into it so that we can actually start having a more reasonable, grounded conversation around these topics. So. I hope you all like my super clickbaity title. I want to get t-shirts made of this. This to me feels like the sort of stage of that we're at in the conversation, right? It's like if you saw this on archive, you might be like, oh yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I saw that poster. Yeah. And that makes me really worried, right? Because we are having a conversation that doesn't have a lot to do with the reality of the research. So let's put a pin in what's actually happening, right? So major advances in the field are taking place, the field of artificial intelligence are taking place because they're enabled by these successes by machine learning tools and approaches. And this is driving some huge societal changes simultaneously. We have a domestication of technology that we're experiencing, which is sort of a sea change, and also an industrial revolution. And that is making a whole bunch of stuff totally nuts, right? But why are we seeing this sort of totally nutsness that we haven't seen when we've experienced these things before? I think it has to do with the place that literally the word intelligence holds for us as humans. So humans have used stories to program each other, to program our communities, to define who we are, what's important, what we want people to do, what our goals are, since we've been able to communicate, right? This is the way that we distribute information and get other people in sort of a scaled way to take action on it. And when we look at those stories, especially those ancient stories, intelligence holds a very special place. Intelligence is one of those key things that makes humans human, right? And a person who's doing a lot of interesting thinking in this area is Ken Anderson. He's a law professor at American University. He studies robotics precedent and also the law of war, so like, super lightweight stuff all the time. And Ken likes to say that intelligence is at the heart of what we believe makes humans special, and therefore, intelligence forces us into a state of anthropomorphization, whenever it brings up in conversation. It has the power to enchant us. It has the power to change the context of the thing that we're talking about without us even realizing it, right? And so when we simply want to talk about predictive tools or things that are helping us to mine sources of data or understand latent patterns in sources of data, the fact that we're calling it intelligent is secretly changing the context on us without us even being able to notice. A really great book that I'm super excited about that delves deeper into these ideas of where the importance of intelligence comes from, how deep those roots actually are, is this great new book, Gods and Robots by Adrienne Mayer. I really recommend it if you are at all interested in thinking about the sort of societal seat of why this conversation can be particularly fraught in the way that it is. And one of my favorite mythologies around animation or intelligence or being able to bring things to life. I mean, pick your favorite Frankenstein or whatever one is you like. But my favorite are golems. And here we see Pump 19 from Terry Pratchett's Going Postal, right? Great movie, excellent book. But they are men of clay brought to life by words, right? And this is from Jewish mythology, and I don't know if you had to be a rabbi or if you could just be any dude who wrote down specific words, specific permutations of words, and then put them into the golem, and that would animate them. And in these stories, often you'll find that the golem is the perfect servant, right? And their main failing, their main foil, is that they carry out the instructions of their master so perfectly, right? It sounds very much like computer programming. So we see these seeds, these stories that we're already telling ourselves when we are talking about intelligence, when we're talking about animation, when we're talking about the ability to make decisions, even when we're not talking about the scientific conversation that we're trying to have now. So we have these sort of inescapable potholes, these traps that we're setting ourselves up for without even knowing it. I think that one of in doing a lot of reading about the sort of the narrative roots of these ideas, this really struck me, and this was a writing about golems themselves. The power of life is so strong that it brings both promise and terror. And I think that puts a really nice pin in the sort of hyperbole that we see, both positive and negative, in the public conversation when we're talking about intelligence, because on some level, we're also conflating it with life and what it means to be human, right? So just thinking about the sort of unintentional importance we're imbuing these ideas with when we talk about, what's happening at this academic conference or what the new thing that came out of Google Brain is. So, but how do we actually navigate it? How do we actually get anywhere with this if we're setting up these traps that we can't even see? This is something that Ken and I, through some conversations, developed. I like to call it the matrix of enchanted thinking, because whenever I say that phrase, I feel I should have a cape and a staff and maybe like a really big hat. But this, I find, is a really nice way to sort of plot your thinking when you are approaching a topic around artificial intelligence, machine learning, regardless of what you're trying to communicate, whether it's sort of a public narrative or your own personal narrative, or you're trying to talk to a collaborator. I also find it incredibly helpful when you're thinking about your audience to think where they are on this plot and then figure out the distance between yourself and them and how much effort that's going to take to move them in the direction that you want them to move. Really, because when you're communicating, really anytime, you're asking a person to take action on an idea that you have, right? And you really can't get that person to take action or movement until you are in the same place and can move there together. Plotting myself, I tend to be pretty utopian in my thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, but I also tend to be pretty everyday. I'm pretty sure that it's going to help me with routine tasks that I'm not very good at that take looking at more information than I could possibly consume. Pretty sure it's going to be able to recommend me a good movie or understand my speech to text when I'm talking to a translator bot. But oftentimes, in the public conversation, you'll find that things are pretty sci-fi and dystopian. And you'll find an extremity of that in the first flags that we see in the public conversation, right? Pictures, icons, the things that we use to quickly represent this conversation and sort of mark the boundary into it for the lay public, even if the conversation beyond it might be very factual, it might be very rooted in the reality of research, the imagery that we're using, the basics that we're using to get into it are a little bit crazy, right? And also, I should say, if anybody has any questions, just like pop in. I would love for this to be a conversation and not just sort of like me blabbing at you for the next half an hour. So if you have anything that you want to say, any questions you want to pose, just feel free to jump in. So let's take a look at what is actually happening. So we sort of see these traps, we understand why it's happening, perhaps. We understand sort of how to navigate it maybe a little bit, but what is actually happening, and specifically in the public conversation. And we'll talk more about the practitioner community in a little bit. But we see a lot of hyperbole in the public conversation, both positive and negative. And emotions are incredibly high here. And really the only other place that we see this sort of level of emotion is when we're talking about medical research. And I think specifically pharmaceutical research. And I think the thing that connects these two conversations, the thread, is that the audience receiving this information feels like it's going to change their lives radically, immediately, and irrevocably, and in ways that they don't understand because they don't have expert knowledge and wouldn't be able to attain it, really, unless they're in graduate school. And this makes for a huge information gap. You have people who feel like they need the information and feel like they're never going to be able to get it, and their expectations for the practitioners for being able to communicate it are very high, and it feels like really high stakes, maybe life or death in some cases. So let's take a look at how this is unfolding, right? What does this actually mean? And I think a really nice, easy way to do that is to look at some of those first flags that we see in the public conversation. This is one of my favorites. This is an image that accompanied a piece in the New York Times. It was an op-ed written by Oren Etzioni about how we should regulate artificial intelligence. Mainly a software thing and thinking about policy. I don't know why you need a robot wearing like male normative gender clothing to represent a conversation about regulating software, right? It's a very confusing image, but these are the things that we are conflating, right? Our first flags are not representing the conversation that we actually want to have. Here's another one. This is also from the New York Times, and this is a commissioned art piece. And maybe when you have an op-ed, the editor who's choosing the art piece to go along with the image doesn't have as much background as they might have when they're working with a reporter. This is with a reported piece. This was specifically focused on the salaries that people in this field are able to command. This also feels to me like a conflation, and I just feel really weird looking at this for a variety of reasons, including the tiny white guy in her head, right? Like just, our first approaches, we're conflating all sorts of different things, and I think that that's putting up major barriers to actually getting to the conversation at hand, to actually talking about what the real issues are here. So, well, maybe let's not put stuff on people, right? This is me saying things about my reactions to these images. Let's take a look at some labeled data, right? Who doesn't love labeled data? So, this is Forbes, right? A reasonably respected publication. Here they're talking about hiring, which is a hot topic, of course, in the world. And they've used this image, and they've used it from Getty, which is one of the places that lots of editors around the world get their images. It's basically a clearinghouse. They have both editorial and creative images, which means they'll shoot like news pieces, like something that's actually happening. And creative, they'll make sort of concept art to go with a piece. And this is sort of a concept thing. But let's take a look at the labels that we're using to bring up that data. Machine learning concept with robot think with binary code on black background. Yes. And also, I love that it's doing thinking. It's doing some serious thinking. Maybe these tags even were generated by an automated system, right? But the thing that we are using to represent our conversation doesn't seem to have much to do with the article, right? If we're talking about hiring, and then are we hiring the robot? Does the robot need to be shaped like a human? So let's look at this a little bit more. This is a part 2. The robot is coming up with our hiring practices. This is very good. He's an HR robot. He needs to be shaped like a human so humans feel comfortable around him. I like this. This is good, Alex. We should patent it. So it's part 2, right? Maybe we have another chance, right? We can take another swing. Let's look at the captions here. Artificial intelligence eye with computer graphics overlays. That is totally a human female, right? What about that is artificial? She's got eyelashes. That's totally meat, right? Like, very confusing. Why are we using these images to represent a conversation that doesn't really have a whole lot to do with them? I think because of these narrative traps that we fall into, because of the historical stories that we tell ourselves. Okay, but maybe it's just these two. Maybe that guy specifically picked them out because he likes the gray background, or he's a big fan of robots. So let's go to the source itself. Let's go look at some images from Getty. This is a search for artificial intelligence. Okay, this face is having problems. This robot is asking for help, and she's totally not even paying attention. All right, more. Still sort of the same, lots of brains, lots of meat brains. This robot is shaking hands with a human. Guess you need robot hands to shake hands. Okay, all right. Oh, wait, no, we have one thing that looks like it might be a representation of image recognition. Great, excellent. So we've gotten through 3 scrolls, and we have something that is finally sort of representative of the work that we're actually doing. So maybe there is hope. Maybe there is hope. Okay, let's take a look at machine learning. If we do the same search on Getty for machine learning in our labeled data set. Oh, God, what is this? Maybe this guy just got his network to work. He's like, yes! Implementation! And down here, it like really works. He's really happy about it now. Yeah. This one maybe has something to do with it, but like, I don't know. Robot arm? At least it's like a function-made robot. At least it's like a purpose-made robot, right? So maybe like not so great. Maybe we sort of don't know what we're talking about in the public conversation where we're trying to start these things off. Maybe it is super fraught. So maybe if we go into, maybe we need something simpler, right? These are editorial images that we are, creative images that we are trying to get to represent sort of larger feelings. Maybe if we went to icons, or if we went to something sleeker that's supposed to communicate more faster. This is artificial intelligence, also from Getty. Okay, we have some human heads. Maybe this one is representative. That feels like a stack. That's good. Maybe this is like image recognition. But still, we are relying on things that to us say human intelligence. That this looks like human intelligence, right? We have a brain that's sort of turning into a piece of a computer. Maybe over here still. Oh, a purpose-built arm. Great. Okay, so maybe we're moving in the right direction. Let's look at artificial. This is machine learning. Sort of the same thing, still the dots, nodes, themes, okay, I get it. Either this is either a robot coming together or maybe we're doing facial recognition, but still we have conflation, but we are moving in the right direction. But it's gonna take a lot of work to defray. And if you'll permit me for a moment, I just want to show you my favorite one. I just love this one so much. This guy is so stoked. He's like, yes, robot business, yes. And this guy is like trying to get out of the frame, right? But the like range of plaid here is so good. The sartorial choices are amazing. And one that I actually got really excited about that I thought was a really sort of creative way to bring in perhaps a reference to the reality of the research. It's like Miami Beach, right? But like maybe we're talking about local maxima and local minima, right? Yeah, no, and then no. Same artist. So we are, even when I get excited that we might be on base, I feel like we're going in a weird direction because we're not actually talking about the same thing. Though I also am going to get t-shirts of this. It's going to say Deep Generative Network for Robot Cats, Miami Beach. It's going to be great. So this is sort of thinking about the larger conversation, and maybe we're casting too wide a net, and I'm not being generous enough by taking a look at reporting that's actually taking place on the field, right? So a little bit of context coming up for these next couple of slides. The Neural Information Processing Systems Conference for the last 30 years has had the acronym NeurIPS. There was a conversation that took place in the community, and there was some polling done, and initially the board for the foundation decided to not make any changes. Then there was some protest and more conversation, and then the board decided to change the acronym. So the acronym for the conference is now NeurIPS, right? So there was a lot of coverage of that conversation taking place in the field, in the community, over the course of the conference, which took place this last December. So these next couple of slides that we're going to talk about are the coverage of the conference. So speaking directly about issues happening in the artificial intelligence community, speaking about directly reporting that's happening on that. And let's take a look at the images that we're using to represent these things that are not only sort of a really intricate societal conversation that we have to have about the community, but also like speaking directly about the AI/ML community, where there's lots of access to imagery around research and representation, visual representations of it. It's a robot hand using a keyboard, the fastest information transfer ever. So good. But this is from Bloomberg, and Bloomberg likes to use a series of slides to let people into their stories, right? So this is when you've clicked through to the story. So maybe on a higher level, to draw people in, we're actually using something that's representational of the conversation or the field that that's taking place in. It's that weird female Sophia robot who like talks but doesn't talk. Great. Let's take a look at some more. Maybe you'll see a theme. Yes, very good. Yeah, this one has hair and a skirt, because we need to perform gender in this way when we are robots, and the hair is very useful in doing your robot job. Yes. And in this one, this is from ZDNet. This is actually talking about some of the work that was presented at the conference, but still, we have a big meaty human face and a gesture at computers, right? These are the two things that, when we bring them together, seem to represent for us in the public conversation artificial intelligence, when we're not conflating it with human-shaped robots. So what is all of this doing to the practitioner community? How are we seeing these ripples play out? We're seeing an explosive interest from other fields and industries, creating a huge demand for collaboration. And for some people, this field has already gone through a number of boom and bust cycles called AI winters, when we've seen this sort of explosive interest, which, because of the communication gap, the difference between what is actually happening, the reality of the research, and the demands from investors and interest don't meet up. We have a cycle where we have a lot of excitement, and then the bottom falls out and people pull out their funding. So a lot of people are wary about perhaps we are in that cycle again. We are seeing more emphasis on explanation and unpacking ideas for the outside world. We're seeing that really sort of coalesce around gatherings like FAT-ML, which is Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency in Machine Learning, which is a new conference and I believe is held in New York. And then also AIES, which is in collaboration with AAAI, which I think just took place. So there should be lots of interesting stuff online if you're interested in that subject area that you could go and explore. But we're seeing these formal bodies start to coalesce around thinking around these ideas and sharing these ideas actively. We're also seeing a heightened focus on larger societal issues as they play out inside the community, inside the field itself, with our discussions around gender and diversity and what it takes to actually have a team that's going to be able to bring diverse thought and diverse solutions to these questions that we're trying to answer. So let's take a look at some more images, some more first flags, some easily consumed things to really sort of crystallize the changes that we might be seeing. This is the International Conference on Machine Learning. This is a lecture being delivered by Professor Josh Tenenbaum, and if you can't see him, there he is. I had a hard time finding him. And this is in Sweden earlier this year, in Stockholm, and this is about 8,000 people. And that is pretty big for this conference, which only a couple of years ago was a couple of thousand people, and then before that was 100 people. And this conference has been going on for around 30 years. And the growth that we're seeing in the number of ticketing is exponential, right? So we're having a lot of growing pains and quick changes, rapid response to be able to accommodate this interest in the field. And so I guess you could forgive them. This article was written about NeurIPS, but that I think the sentiment stays when in the public conversation we see things like it's being compared to the AI Superbowl. I don't know what the AI Superbowl would be because I don't know how you win, and also I hope no one's getting concussions. Like, it's a real problem if people are getting concussions at an academic conference. Please no. This is Kate Crawford. This was a talk that she delivered mid last year at the Royal Society. This was a public lecture series, I believe sponsored by DeepMind. You and AI, right? How can you, a layperson, think about how you're interacting with artificial intelligence? What is important to you in these conversations? How can you understand them? How can you be active in them? And in this lecture, Kate said it's no longer acceptable for the field to think of itself as just engineers. And that, to me, is a pretty profound statement to say to people who think of themselves as engineers and as creators and as practitioners. She called on the field to not only do what they see traditionally as their job, but also to be philosophers and ethicists. And that, to me, feels like a sea change. It feels like something is really going to be, there's going to be a shift in what we demand of our teams and our individuals as they build their tools and as they think about the impacts that they're going to have on people's lives. Yeah?
What do you see as the mechanisms that would best enable practitioners to be effective as philosophers and ethicists? I mean, you mentioned some conferences, those seem like a good starting point, but it's a lot to expect people who haven't thought in those ways or thought that was in the wheelhouse to suddenly just go do those things.
Absolutely, right? Yeah, you have one PhD, my God, please, don't get another, right? Like, that's just too much. I think collaboration is really the only solution, right? Because, you have so much expertise, you have so much time. If you're at this level and you're a practitioner in this field, you've probably amassed a lot of expertise in projects, but to find someone who is interested in those questions, who has expertise that you feel like joins with yours in the right way, who you can ask questions of, I think is the only actionable way to approach it. I think when Kate said we can no longer think of ourselves as just engineers, we have to think of ourselves as ethicists and philosophers. She made a really interesting point about being willing to ask ethical and philosophical questions, right? And the way that you put that into action is you find someone who's willing to talk about those with you or answer them for you. So that's the way that I see it going. But I think it's a fascinating discussion. We're seeing more and more of it take place. Yeah, cool. So all this is good. We see lots of expansion. We see lots of people coming to these conferences. We see lots of formation around these ideas for sort of formal movement in these directions to think clearly and efficiently and effectively about what needs to be done. But we're also, in this attempt to broaden and make more accessible, falling into the same narrative traps that the public conversation is susceptible to. I would like to introduce you to the person that I see as the enemy in all of this. I hate him so much. He's adorable, he's so cute, he's so approachable. You could this robot, he's probably shorter than you, it's fine, He's got fingers and a mortarboard. I don't even know what humans use a mortarboard for. Why does a robot need one? Really, we don't. And the thing that I find most insidious about this little guy is where I found him. Coursera, yes, very good. So this is, he is the masthead, or was at the time, and this was about 6 months ago. I should check it again. But he's the masthead for Andrew Ng's machine learning course on Coursera for Stanford. So we have our conflations, we have our first flags, even when we are trying to open the gates to the actual technical knowledge that's going to allow a lay public into being a part of this conversation. So we need to be aware of these traps, of these sort of narrative traps that we are setting for ourselves when we have these conversations around that, simply include the idea of intelligence and what it means to be intelligent. So how do we get out of this trap? How do we maneuver around it, at least? I don't think that we're ever going to be able to remove the trap, but I think if we can see it, if we can talk about it, if we can recognize it, then we can move around it. And I think in order to do that we have a fairly simple solution. We have lots of historical examples of technological domestication and industrial revolution that we can look back on, that will give us another facet, that we can sort of bend the light of this conversation through to find a new way to approach these ideas. And I want to share a couple with you, and hopefully they'll inspire you to take a look at ones that you're interested in. So I've been doing a lot of reading on the domestication of electricity, which I find to be a fascinating subject. And often in this conversation, you'll hear sort of used as a proxy for artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's the new electricity. All the buildings have to get it, right? All the companies have to have it. Once we all have it, you'll never go back. And when the AI goes out, everyone's going like, well, I'll go home. We got an AI brownout, right? So this is a really fascinating, this was a really fascinating piece, Domesticating Electricity, Technology, Uncertainty, and Gender, my favorite topic, by Graham Godet, and it's available as a PDF on the internet. I suggest you all Google it if you are interested in this. And this is mainly focusing on the domestication of electricity in the UK. It's going sort of, this is a piece early on in the text. We're talking about widespread cultural fears that you had to overcome. We're talking about having technocratic management that allows us to overcome the hazards, right? You don't want people to get electrocuted, don't do it. But the thing that I found particularly interesting was that here, later on in the passage, we're talking about how the aesthetic revulsion to electric light by female house managers had to be countered with an effective campaign of decorative shaded lighting, lampshades, because electric light makes you look gross, right? It's like suddenly you've had all this beautiful candlelight or gaslight, and everyone looks very romantic and hazy, and then you get your house electrified, and everyone is suddenly in 4D, and you can see everybody's pores, and you no longer want to be with the person you're with. It's gross. So what are the AI lampshades that we need to be thinking about, right? What are these sort of smaller questions, smaller actionable questions that we're maybe not seeing as we bring these technologies into our lives and into our routine daily use more and more? I think those questions are really fascinating, and I think they're going to shape a lot of the public conversation going forward as we use them, as we use these technologies more and more fluidly in a daily basis. Yeah. This is from a book by Graham Gooday, Gooday, Domesticating Electricity, Technology, Uncertainty, and Gender, 1800 to 1914. Yeah, of course. So this is one thing. Yeah, hey.
So I feel like this is in some ways a different problem, though, than the people representing AI research with faces and swirly zeros.
Absolutely.
In that case, they don't know what AI is actually people are doing.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I've heard of this thing with super high tech and not even knowing about it. And this is sort of once they start interacting with it.
Exactly. Once there is a sort of larger level of knowledge, you know, there's, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but there's this story of one of the people who was trying to get electricity to be popularized in the United States by taking around a menagerie of animals and then like electrocuting them to like demonstrate that like it was dangerous, but you could control it. Right, yeah. I feel like we're in that phase for artificial intelligence right now. We're like, robots, it's great, let's electrocute this elephant, no problem. But when we get to the next step, when people are like, okay, yeah, I understand my privacy rights, I understand how much information is being gone through, I have some sort of facility with this information, with these tools, I know how they're being used, I know how I can use them. Like, what's the next step? Can we see the lampshades before we need to invent them? Right? How do we get to Tiffany and making super sweet lampshades before we know that we need them? Is that possible? Yeah, totally. Yeah. Cool. So thinking about the moving on from domesticating technology, thinking about the next sort of big societal thing that is being forced by these tools, the advances in this field. We're talking literally about industrial revolution, and I'm pretty sure that the Global Economic Forum, I think that's the guys in Davos, right? All those rich people who go to Davos, have branded it the fourth industrial revolution. There's a name for it already. People are putting a pin in it. So how can we look back on the effects of previous industrial revolutions to maybe gain some foresight on what might be happening to our culture, to our society? This is an engraving of the Haymarket Riot, right? This is a group of people in Chicago in 1889 were protesting for an 8-hour workday, right? Because of the Industrial Revolution, we saw a huge uptake of these very efficient machines, and people basically said, great, humans can work all day now, right? And the reaction was the growth of the labor movement, and this idea that people should have 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours of sleep. And the effort, the amount of work that it took to change that, to get that, to make it sort of standard in our lives, to have the idea of a weekend was huge. And right now we're sort of discussing ephemerally ideas like universal income and things like that, but how can we sort of look forward to anticipate what are the other things? What is the AI weekend? What is the thing that's going to actually change the way that our relationship to work and labor and things like that? And a really important thing to remember about this, and I think that this captures really nicely this, and this was one of the first flags that was used when around the labor movement. This was an engraving that was done in a Chicago newspaper that was highly distributed around the U.S. And there was the demonstration was peaceful, and then someone else set off a bomb. Right? So where are those opportunities for collision that we might be able to avoid, for danger? So that has been, I hope, an interesting overview for all of you about the public conversation, how it's playing out, the effects on both the public understanding and the community itself, and where we might be able to go if we take a step back and we look back. But I'd like to share with you, leave with you a final thought. Probably the question I get asked most often about as someone who thinks about artificial intelligence and communication and machine learning. The Terminator is not AI's fault, it's the physicists. If we didn't have time travel, the robots wouldn't have come back in time. So with that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it.